All right, so I'm going to walk you through a GED practice math test. This is the real practice test that you can find on the GED's website. I'll put a link below so you can try it yourself. Maybe you want to try it before you listen to me talk about it. I'm going to sort of talk you through how I would approach this, sort of think aloud about my thought process to get to the right answer. I've done this for the other three subjects. This one's a little different. The other three subjects, the reasoning through language arts and the science and the social studies, you can use certain techniques and strategies to really up your score. You don't actually have to know much about science or social studies to do well on those tests. You just have to be a good reader and a good critical thinker. Math is not like that. Math, you actually need to know some math. And I won't be teaching you the math. If there's stuff on here that you don't know, I'll try to come up with some links that might be helpful. But I'm just going to really talk about how to approach this with maximize your chances based on what you hopefully know already. All right, question number 1. A painter rented a wallpaper steamer at 9 a.m. and returned it at 4 p.m. He paid a total of $28.84. What was the rental cost per hour? Now, there's a couple of ways that you can do this. I'll show you the sort of by the book way that you can do it first. They do give you some resources. The most important resources are, number 1, this calculator here, which you'll need to, well, you should use to do the arithmetic. And they give you a formula sheet. Let's take a look at that formula sheet because it has the equation that we actually need to solve this one. It's sort of hidden, but it's there. It's the total cost equals number of units and times the price per unit. The GED will not ask you any questions that require a formula that is not on the sheet. So you don't need to memorize anything formula-wise. This one formula here that we're using, this is, we know 2 of the 3 things and we can just plug it in. We know the total cost, it's right here. The number of units, it's not really intuitive, but what they're talking about here is time. They're talking about the units are hours. And we know that if he picked it up at 9 and returned it at 4, well, if you need to count that on your fingers, that's just fine. It's 7 hours. So 28.84 equals 7 hours times whatever we're trying to find. That's a basic solve for x equation. You divide both sides by 7. The 7s cancel out on that side. It leaves you with 28.84 divided by 7. That's your answer. The answer is C. The other way you can do this is just plug in the answers until one of them works. This is a strategy you can use on some math problems because you know that one of these 4 is going to work. What do we know? Well, we know that he had it for 7 hours, and we know that in the end he ended up paying $28.84. So if it was $2.43 an hour, and he had it for 7 hours, well, that's just a multiplication, right? That's just, we're going to see if 2.43 times 7 equals 28.84. It doesn't. And B also doesn't. But when we get to C, we find that it does. So you can use some critical thinking to try to translate math into English and back again. This translation between math and English is something that's going to come up a lot on this practice test and on the real GED test. Not in this question, though. This is a straight math question. What is the value of 36x minus 8y squared when x equals 3 and y is equal to negative 6? Well, they tell us what x and y are, so we just plug them in. I rewrite it like this. I put the parentheses there on the calculator. When you use the calculator, they have the parentheses feature. Just so that you wouldn't confuse the order of operations, which is, remember, PEMDAS. Or apparently in Canada, it's PEMDAS with a B because they use brackets instead of parentheses. I'm in America. There is some sort of confusion you might have seen on Facebook, some sort of tricky math questions that sort of invite you to screw it up, where you don't really, using PEMDAS doesn't work. Well, on the GED test, every question you can use PEMDAS. It's not, you won't see any of those only 2%. Well, if people will get this right, you won't see those. You'll see normal PEMDAS questions. So the first thing we need to do, parentheses, I put those in, exponents. Let's do those. So negative 6 squared is 36 just positive 36. And you can actually just plug this in as it's written here into the calculator and push equals. It will give you this, negative 180. This is about as easy as a question will get on the GED math. There's maybe one or two that are in this league of easiness, but definitely don't skip these. These are the easy ones. All right, now we're into a harder one. This is going to require some translation. All right, Annie is planning a business trip meeting for her company. She has a budget of $1,325 for renting a meeting room at a local hotel and providing lunch. She expects 26 people to attend the meeting. The cost of renting the meeting room is $270. Which inequality shows how to find the amount X Annie can spend on lunch for each person? Okay, so the first word that jumps out at me is that word. She has a budget of this amount. And all of these things are like representing all that like word garbage they just spewed out at you that we have to translate. It's basically asking like, when you translate this, what does that equal in math? Well, I know what budget means. It means that's the most you can spend. You can't spend more than your budget, at least not in this simple math question. So what I'm looking at here is a bunch of stuff, all my expenses added together is either going to be greater than, see the greater than symbol, or it's going to be less than 1,325, my budget. And if it can't be bigger than the budget, right? So all the expenses together must be less than the budget. I don't know if you remember, this is the greater than sign. Whatever side the open side is pointing towards is the greater than, and the closed side, the little point, is pointing towards the littler than. So we can right away eliminate the ones that say expenses are bigger than the budget. Boom, we're halfway done. We now have a 50-50 shot. We just have to figure out this last two. So the question is, we have 26 people coming to lunch and $270 for the room. And we have this X. The only difference between B and D is where the X is, really. The X is next to the 26 here, and it's next to the 270 here. And we know that X is the amount that she can spend on lunch for each person. Okay, well that makes sense. Because if one of these is going to change based on how many people show up, right? Is it going to be the amount of the room? Is that going to change based on how many people show up? Or is it going to change based on how many, the number of people, how much she can spend on lunch for each person? Does that have anything to do with the cost of the room? No, the room is just $270. That's not going to change no matter if there's 5 people or 10 people or a million people. It's got to be a really big room, I guess. But in terms of how many people show up to spend on lunch, if there's 5 people and she can spend $10, that's going to be a lot less than if there's 50 people and they show up and she still has to spend that $10. So this, to me, 26 people is going to matter. The X there is going to influence that 26. It's not going to influence that 270. So that makes sense to me. She expects 26 people to show up. She spends X dollars on it. She adds $270, the cost of the room, and all that together has to be less than $1,325. All right, there's your answer. Okay, this is another translation question. Dominic earns $285 a week plus 8% commission rate on all his sales. If he sells $4,213 worth of merchandise in 1 week, how much will his total earnings for the week be? Okay, so, well, he's got salary plus his commission, and that equals his total earnings. That's what I sort of gathered from this. He's going to make $285 no matter what, plus whatever his commission is, right? So $285 plus 8% of this amount. Now the key here is to recognize that the word of in math language means multiply. There are some things that just you need. It's like donde está el baño? It's like basic things you need to get along in the world of math. And knowing that of means multiply is one of those things. Less means subtract. Plus means add. So you're just going to put this into your calculator. There is a percent. This is what the calculator looks like. There is a percent sign. It's sort of too hard to see on this YouTube video, but it's like that little green thing there. So you push the second button and then the parentheses there, and you can put it in. Just as a heads up, there are some videos, like if you're not comfortable with this on-screen calculator. You can practice on the GED website playing with it, and you can actually buy one of these for 15 or 20 bucks at Walmart or Target or whatever. And they'll let you take this specific calculator, the Texas Instruments 30XS, into the test with you. No other kind of calculator, just as a heads up. So you plug that in, ta-da, there's your answer. There's another way to do this. If you're pressed for time, you can sort of like do it the guesstimate way, which is like, if you go out to eat and you want to calculate a tip, it's kind of like the same sort of thing. You know that his commission is 8% of this. Well, 8% is like almost 10%, and 10% is really easy to calculate. You just kind of move the decimal place 1 over. So instead of $4,200, it's $420, right? So it's a little less than 420, we'll say 400. We know he makes 285 plus a little less than 10% of that. So that's going to give us something that's about this. You can sort of do this in your head. It's going to give you 685. It turns out D is the only one that's like in the ballpark. So you could do it like the guesstimate way. I'm more of a by the book way, so I definitely use my calculator because they gave it to me. But it will point you in the right direction and save you a little time if you're comfortable doing that. Yes, there's the arrow. Okay, this is long and complicated. Actually, it turns out this one isn't that complicated, but let's read it and see what's going on here. Scientist is studying red maple tree growth in a state park. She measured the trunk diameters of a sample of trees in the same month every other year. The tables show the data for 2 of the trees. All right, this is the final year 13, that she will collect data. When her data collection is complete, she will predict future red maple growth. Okay, so this is all background stuff. They give you 2 charts for 1 tree and 2 trees. They tell you the year that she measured and how many inches the diameter of the trunk was. And then the question is over here. The scientist plots the data for tree 2 on the coordinate grid. Okay, so we already know we're dealing with this chart. She begins by plotting data for year 3 and year 11. All right, so we know the 2 things to focus on. What are the locations of the 2 points in the coordinated grid? Click on the grid to plot the points. Well, you need to recognize that these are x and y values for this chart. The year is the x, that's the horizontal down here, and the diameter is the y, that's the vertical. So it's basically go over 3 and up 12. Go over 11, go up 14.4. That's pretty straightforward. It'll give you those 2 things, over 3, up 12, over 11, up 14.4. There's a lot going on here, and that's all you need for this question. Unfortunately, there's another question about the same thing. In fact, there's going to be another question after this. And the first one was pretty straightforward and pretty easy. This one, the scientist creates an equation that models her data for each tree so that she can predict the diameter in the future. Complete a linear equations, that's a typo, right? Complete a linear equation that fits the data for tree 1, where x is the year and y is the trunk diameter in inches. Click on the variables and drag them up. Okay, so it's figure out the equation. If you're looking at this and you're thinking, what you need to do is flag this for review and skip this question. Go to next and come back to it at the end. And there's a very good reason to do that. This question right here, this one and the next one, are as hard as a GED math question gets. And in fact, you can feel free to skip ahead these 2 questions if this is just going to like bore you to death and you have no idea what's going on. That's fine. If you want to stick around, I'm going to go through it. That's great too. But the reason you want to skip it on the real test and come back to it at the end is that there might be some really easy gimme questions at the very end of the test. And you don't want to have wasted all this time trying to figure out the hard question, the question you have the lowest chance of getting right anyway, and then get to the end and not have time to do the easy stuff. If you flag it and skip it and come back, well, if you're running out of time at the end, you can guess randomly, drag 3 random things up there, and you probably won't get it right, but you probably wouldn't have got it right anyway if you didn't know what was going on to begin with. So that's probably the biggest strategy I can give you for the math test is when you recognize the question is going to be really hard, skip it and come back to it at the end. Get all the easy ones first. All right, so let's talk about how you would actually do this. It talks about linear equations. Okay, what is a linear equation? Well, a linear equation, maybe you know this, maybe you don't. Linear means line. It's got the word line in it right there. And if you sort of look back, if you connect these two dots, what do you have? You have a line. That's what they're asking for. And they also tell you that there's x is the year and y is the... Well, here's an equation. Y equals something something plus something. Maybe something is like tickling in the back of your memory. You remember this from like, I don't know, 8th grade math, 9th grade math. There might be a formula that you can use. If you click on the formula sheet, you will find something that has an x and a y in it that fits this formula. That is, oops, I was showing you here what the line looks like when you connect it. That is this right here. It's the slope-intercept form of the equation of a line. It's on the formula sheet. Y equals mx plus b. Great. Y equals mx plus b. Unfortunately, there's only one of those three things that you can just drag in. It's the x part. So we can just drag that up right there because that's where that goes. Now we need to put the m, which is some number, and b, which is some number. And you need to, they don't tell you in the formula sheet what those stand for. The m stands for slope, and the b stands for y-intercept. If you remembered that, fantastic. If not, that's okay. Y equals mx plus b very well might come up on your GED test. So if you don't understand what this is all about, it might be worth watching a YouTube video or going to Khan Academy to sort of refresh or teach yourself what's going on here. Slope is the m, and slope is, well, first let's focus on this. Tree 1. So we're just looking at this chart here. Slope is rise over run, which means that for every thing it goes up, that's the x value, the rise, it goes up from 1 to 3. I'm sorry, that screwed up my x and my y. The y is the vertical one. For every 18.6, it goes up something to 19.2, and the run, the x, the horizontal, this way, goes up from 1 to 3. So how much does it go up from this one to this one? Well, you can put that in your calculator. Maybe you can do it in your head. It's 0.6. And every one of these is 0.6. In fact, every one of these is 0.6 too. Everything goes up 0.6 every 2 years. So the slope is 0.6 divided by 2. Rise over run. 0.6 divided by 2 is 0.3. Hey, what do you know? 0.3. We can just drag that up there. We're 2/3 of the way done. Now the question is, where does it cross the y-axis when x equals 0? That's what the b really means. It means the y-intercept when x is equal to 0. Well, there's no 0 here. There's 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So we have to kind of like put it there ourselves and figure out what it would be. Because it's a line. It's a regular, predictable trajectory. Like we know by looking at what it looks like, where it's going, where it's been. So if every 2 years it goes up 0.6, that means every 1 year it goes up half that, right? So like if there was a 2 in here between the 1 and the 3, it would go from 18.6 to 18.9 because that's halfway between those two. It's 0.3, right? That's the slope. So we know this has got to be 0.3 less than 18.6, which is 18.3. There's your answer. That was long. That was hard. There was a lot of opportunities to screw things up. Skip it. Come back to it. If you can do it, great. If not, don't worry about it. This one is even harder because this one has like so many little traps. They're really devious, those GED folks. All right, in year 13, the scientists will put a tree wrap around tree number 1. All right, so we're talking about tree number 1 again, to protect it from the winter snow. The height of the tree wrap needs to be 45 inches. So, all right, the wrap is priced by the square foot. To the nearest square foot, how many square feet of wrap does she need? All right, so how much of this stuff do we need to buy? Well, it's by the square foot, and what shape does this make? Let's look at the formula sheet. You need to recognize, they don't tell you that this, like a long tube, there's not like a surface area of a tube, there's a cylinder. And this is it. Surface area of a cylinder is equal to 2 pi r h plus 2 pi r squared. Great. Okay, now we have the formula. Sort of. What this formula, this is the first landmine that they've put in your path. 2 pi r h plus 2 pi r squared. Well, the 2 pi r h thing is what you're looking at here. It's open-ended. There's no top to this tree wrap or bottom, which is actually what this means. 2 pi r squared. Maybe you recognize pi r squared is the area of a circle. Well, it's the circle that fits on top and the circle that fits in the bottom. That's why there's two of them. So if you're doing the surface area of a whole closed cylinder, that's what you want. But we're doing an open cylinder, so you have to recognize that we don't want that. Okay, so that's done. We're looking at tree 1, and it tells us we're looking at year 13. So 2 pi r h. Well, they don't give us r. They give us the rate. They ask for the radius, but they give us the diameter. And you need to know that the diameter is twice the radius. The radius is half of a diameter. So we know that pi is equal to 3.14. Actually, maybe you don't know that, but know that. That's something that will help you with your calculator. Radius is equal to half of the diameter, right? 22.2 divided by 2 is equal to 11.1. I just divided that in half to get the radius, and I know the height. That's the easiest thing so far. They've just told us 45 inches. So I plug all this stuff in, I put it in my calculator, and ta-da, 31. What? That's not one of the answers. Okay, that's annoying. The reason is, and I got this, I had to look at this a bunch of times to realize this is inches. Inches, 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 and they're asking for it by the foot because they are obnoxious. So, how many inches in a foot? 12, right? Just divide this by 12, you get 261, there's your answer. No, 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 no. Another landmine they put into it. The reason is because it's square inches and square feet, and it's not 12 square inches in a square foot. Because if you look at the square here, to get the area, 1 square foot, it's 12 one side times 12. It's 144. You have to divide this thing by 144. 144 square inches is the same as 1 square foot. You cross multiply here. If this doesn't make sense, again, I invite you to go to Khan Academy for the basic sort of simple algebra stuff. We get an equation, this amount of inches divided by that. We solve for x, divide both sides by 144, and there's your answer, finally. I hope you would have skipped this one, and you're just trying to solve this at the end, because if you're wasting your time in the middle of the test, you're gonna miss out on focusing on some really easy questions, or easier. Nothing in math is really easy, if you ask me. All right, 21.78, we want it to the nearest square foot. The answer is A. All right. Ooh, this looks pretty easy. The graph shows the level of ibuprofen Y units in a patient's bloodstream X hours after the ibuprofen was taken. The level of ibuprofen in the patient's bloodstream increased from something hours to something hours. The first way, when my brain reads this, it increased from some amount to some other amount. But that's not what it's saying here. It's saying it increased from some hours to some other hours. So I guess what they're asking, when you click on these, the select drop-down menus, you get these choices. It increased from the hours of something to the hour of something else. And the only time it's going up, this is increasing, is between the hours of 0, when you first swallow the pill, to less than the first hour. Everything else, it's decreasing. It goes down, it goes down, it goes down. So it increases from 0 to the only one on this. There's your 0, there's the only one that's less than 1, 2/3. There's your answers. That was pretty easy. That one took 30 seconds. The last two questions took 15 minutes, it felt like. All right. An office uses drinking cups in the shape of a cone with dimensions as shown. To the nearest tenth of a cubic inch, what is the volume of each drinking cup? All right, so helpfully they tell you the shape you're looking for, and they tell you what you're looking for, the volume of a cone. We're going to go to the formula sheet. We'll click on it. We get the volume of a cone, 1/3 pi r squared h. Great. There's our formula. Once again, though, the only sort of trick that they put in our path, we can't just plug it right in because they don't give us the radius, they give us the diameter. And remember, we have to divide this by 2. So we need to figure out what half of 2 3/4 is. There's a bunch of ways to do that. You can just kind of like guesstimate. That will get you to the right answer because these answers are far enough apart that a guesstimate will probably do okay. Maybe you see like this is like a little more than 1.5, so you just use like, or I'm sorry, 2.5, so you use 1 1/4. The way I know this is 2.75 because 3/4 is 75%. I use quarters all the time. 1/4 is 25 cents, 2 is 50, 3 is 75 cents, 0.75. Maybe you want to do, you love math, so you're going to turn this mixed fraction into an improper fraction, and then however you do it, that's the answer. The radius is half of 2 3/4. Now all we have to do is plug it in. You can use the parentheses function on the calculator and just type this right into the calculator. If you want, you know that 1/3 is equal to 0.33. There's sort of like less chance by avoiding fractions. You can avoid order of operations, PEMDAS errors. I don't know. Maybe you just ignore it. Plug this in, you're going to get the right answer. It's this. It's B. All right. Here's our last question. This one is a little tricky. This is, again, a translation question. Translate between math and English. There are S steps from the pedestal to the head of the Statue of Liberty. The number of steps in the Washington Monument is 27 less than 26 times the number of the steps in the Statue of Liberty, which expression represents the number of steps in the Washington Monument in terms of S. Okay. So there's a couple of words that jump out at me. Like, my Spanish is bad, but there's a few words I know, and I focus on those words and try to like make meaning based on those few Spanish words I know. Well, there's one word that jumps out at me in English that I'm going to try to translate into math. Maybe you know this word, maybe you don't. Expression. There's a couple of different kinds of math phrases. An equation, everybody knows an equation. That one is a bunch of math terms with an equal sign. There's one that's an inequality. Inequality is like an equation, but instead of an equal sign, it's got one of these things, greater than or less than. That's an inequality. An expression is just like a part of a sentence. It's a phrase. It doesn't have any equal signs or any greater than or less than signs. So that's a clue if you know what expression means. If you don't, that's okay. The other key word here is 27 less. Remember earlier in the video, we talked about how of means multiply. Well, less means subtract. So we're looking for something that has subtraction in it. If it doesn't have subtraction, it's not going to be right. And this is tricky. Of course, the GED is trying to be tricky because they have this less than phrase here, which, oh, what do you know? That's the less than inequality. The reason that's not right is because of what this really says. You translate this from math into English. It says the number 27 is less than 6 times the number of steps in the Statue of Liberty. That's not right. It's not. It doesn't say anything that it's like less than the number 27 or greater than the number of 27. It says it's less than 6 times the number of steps in the Statue of Liberty. So we know it has to have a subtraction. We know that it can't be one of these two less thans. Can't trick us. So it's either B or C. We got a 50-50 shot. Now the question is, which of these is right? Well, let's look at what it says. The number of steps is 27 less than 6 times the number of steps in the Statue of Liberty. And S is equal to steps in the Statue of Liberty. That makes sense. C makes sense to me. By putting these parentheses in, you're going to have to distribute that 6. So you get the 6x, that's right. But then you have minus 27 times 6, which is like 160 something. They don't mention that number anywhere here. So it's not going to be B. The one that makes the most sense is C. There is your answer. That is 10 GED questions from the real practice on their very own website. If you like this video, check out the other ones I did on the social studies and the science and the language arts. Always subscribe. Hope this helped.